Welcome to Compassionate Living.
Saturn Cube Theory explained. Part 5, the clock, the system, and the cage. It starts the same way it always starts. Not with a chart, not with a textbook, not with a neat explanation that fits into a classroom. It starts with that quiet suspicion that something about everyday life is too tight, too scheduled, too measured, too monitored. You look around and you realize almost everything that shapes you is built out of the same two materials: time and money. Time tells you when you may wake, when you may work, when you may rest, when you may eat, when you may speak, when you may stop. Money tells you what you may have, where you may live, what you may risk, what you may heal, what you may learn, what you may refuse. And the Saturn Cube worldview takes those two materials and says, this is not random. This is the architecture of the prison. Because in this mythology, Saturn is not just a planet. Saturn is the law of limitation itself. Saturn is the force that turns life into a system. Saturn is the invisible accountant. Saturn is the cold hand on the shoulder that says you cannot. Saturn is the boundary that becomes a cage. And if you were going to build a cage that people accepted willingly, you would not use iron bars. You would use time. And you would use money. You would use clocks and calendars. You would use debt and scarcity. You would make the prison feel like adulthood, like responsibility, like realism. You would make the cage feel like common sense. That is what makes this conspiracy so seductive. It does not ask you to believe something that feels alien. It asks you to look at your own life and name the pressure you already feel, because the pressure is constant. The alarm clock, the shift, the commute, the appointment, the deadline, the bill, the fee, the interest, the late notice, the credit score, the rent, the insurance, the taxes, the subscription, the renewal, the penalty. It never stops. And the Saturn Cube story says, of course it never stops. That is the point. Now, in the language of this theory, the cube is the symbol of containment. The cube is matter. The cube is the boxed reality where spirit forgets itself. So what happens when you take a living soul and drop it into a boxed world? You give it a schedule, you give it a price tag, you give it a timer, you give it a meter, you give it a number, and you teach it to believe it is those numbers. You teach it to identify with the measurements. That is the first move. You are not a person, you are a birth certificate, you are an ID, you are a social security number, you are a record, you are a profile, you are a file, you are a customer, you are a consumer, you are a taxpayer, you are a worker, you are a unit. That's how the cube speaks. It does not say, I hate you. It says, you are data. And the moment you accept that, you start living like data. You start living like a spreadsheet. You start living like an account that must balance. You start living like a resource that must be managed. And then the cube does something brilliant. It gives you a game. It says, here is the scoreboard. Here is the currency. Here are the points. Here is the ladder. Here is the algorithm. Here is the status. Go, chase, compete, prove yourself. The modern world is full of invisible scoreboards. Some are obvious: your bank account, your debt, your salary. Some are quieter: your likes, your views, your follower count, your engagement, your reputation. Some are hidden behind polite language: your performance, your productivity, your efficiency, your output. But the shape of the game is always the same: do more, faster, cheaper, better, or you fall. And in Saturn Cube storytelling, this is not just capitalism. It is not just human ambition. It is not just civilization. It is Saturnian control. Saturn as the strict father energy. Saturn as the principle that rewards compliance and punishes instinct. Saturn as the god who says, you earn your right to live. So let us talk about money first, because money feels neutral on the surface. Money feels like a tool, a useful invention. But conspiracy storytellers do not stop at the surface. They ask, what is money really doing to the human mind? And their answer is chilling. Money turns life into a transaction. Money turns relationships into negotiations. Money turns time into labor. Money turns desire into a purchase. Money turns survival into a subscription. Money turns the earth into property. And property is one of the cube's favorite words, because property means lines, borders, fences, ownership, separation, control. If you want to see the cube in physical form, look at the way the world is divided into squares on a map. Look at the way land is carved into parcels. Look at the way neighborhoods are priced. Look at the way access is gated. Look at the way abundance is locked behind paywalls. That is the cube pattern. The world boxed up. The world turned into units. And then the theory goes deeper. It says money is not only a tool, it is a spell. Because what do most people spend their lives doing? They trade their life energy for money. They trade their waking hours for money. They trade their creativity for money. They trade their bodies for money. They trade their attention for money. And then they trade the money back for survival. Food, shelter, heat, water, medicine. In other words, the system makes you rent your own existence. That is how the cube becomes a prison without walls. You cannot leave because you need the currency to breathe. And here's where the story turns into its darker form. Because in this worldview, money is not just paper or numbers. Money is a mechanism of control because of debt. Debt is the future already owned. Debt is tomorrow already promised. Debt is the feeling that you cannot relax because the system has a claim on you. And once you see that, you start noticing how much of modern life is built on debt. Student debt, medical debt, credit cards, mortgages, loans, financing, buy now, pay later, the future sold in installments. And then comes the part that makes Saturn Cube believers sit up straighter. Interest. Interest is the price of time. Interest is what turns money into a time machine. Because interest is a number that grows while you sleep. Interest is the invisible clock inside the money itself. In this conspiracy lens, interest is Saturnian because it rewards those who already have and punishes those who do not. It turns time into a weapon. It turns delay into a fee. It turns survival into a trap. If Saturn rules time and limitation, then interest is Saturn's signature in the financial world. The system says you may borrow to survive, but you will pay more later, and the later will be heavier than the now. And that weight will keep you obedient. Because when you are in debt, your choices shrink. You cannot risk, you cannot rest, you cannot refuse, you cannot wander, you cannot say no. You learn to comply because compliance feels safer than uncertainty. That is how the cube trains you. Now, in conspiracy storytelling, there is always a moment where the everyday becomes symbolic, where a normal object becomes charged. Money is full of symbols, words like trust, liberty, in God we trust, eagles, pyramids, eyes, seals, signatures. But the Saturn Cube narrative is not only about the symbols printed on currency, it is about the symbol that currency becomes, a chain, a leash, a timer, a box. And that is why in these stories, money is never just economics. Money is metaphysics. Money is how the cube gets inside your nervous system. Because what is money anxiety? It is fear of time, fear of the future, fear of being trapped, fear of being unable to provide, fear of losing shelter, fear of losing medical care, fear of hunger, fear of falling, and fear is the fuel of the whole grid, according to the theory. Fear keeps you small, fear keeps you predictable, fear keeps you inside the box. Now let us talk about time, because if money is the chain, time is the lock. Time is the oldest spell. It is the thing you cannot buy more of, no matter how rich you get, and it is the thing the system uses most efficiently. Because time is not only minutes and hours, time is structure, time is routine, time is deadlines, time is schedules. Time is the sense that you are late. Late is one of the cube's most powerful emotions. Late makes you run. Late makes you panic. Late makes you apologize. Late makes you obey. Late makes you feel guilty even when you did nothing wrong. And modern life is built to keep you feeling late. You are behind on emails, behind on laundry, behind on bills, behind on exercise, behind on cleaning, behind on parenting, behind on your goals, behind on healing, behind on your dreams. The system makes you feel behind so that you never feel finished. And when you never feel finished, you never feel free. This is why the Saturn Cube story often connects Saturn not only to discipline, but to the calendar itself. Think about it. Your life is chopped into boxes: weeks, work weeks, school weeks, pay periods, fiscal quarters, hours, time blocks, timesheets, punch cards, schedules that box your attention into neat squares. And in this worldview, that is not just organization, that is containment. Because if you want to contain a soul, you break its day into slices so small it forgets the whole. You break its life into tasks so constant it forgets its calling. You break its attention into fragments so scattered it forgets its own depth. The cube loves fragmentation. The cube loves distraction. The cube loves busyness. Because busyness is a perfect prison. A busy person is too tired to rebel. A busy person is too tired to think. A busy person is too tired to feel. A busy person is too tired to remember. And remembering is dangerous. Remembering that you are more than the schedule. Remembering that you are more than the debt. Remembering that you are more than your productivity. Remembering that you are alive. Now, in the conspiracy lens, there is another layer. They say the system does not only control your external time, it controls your internal time, your sense of urgency, your sense of scarcity, your nervous system. Because if you can keep someone in a constant state of hurry, they will accept almost anything. Hurry makes you cut corners. Hurry makes you compromise. Hurry makes you accept cheap substitutes for real nourishment. Hurry makes you swallow your intuition. Hurry makes you choose convenience over truth. And the cube loves convenience, because convenience keeps you dependent. So the theory points to the modern obsession with speed. Fast food, fast shipping, fast internet, instant gratification, everything now. No waiting, no patience, no silence, no stillness. Because stillness is where the soul starts noticing things. Stillness is where you start hearing your own mind. Stillness is where the grid becomes audible. So the system fills every gap with noise, screens, notifications, infinite scroll, autoplay, the never-ending feed. And if you look closely, what shape are those screens? Rectangles, little glowing boxes, a world of boxes within boxes, a cube reality, flat packed into your hand. And then the conspiracy becomes almost poetic. They say the cube is not only outside you, the cube is in your pocket, the cube is in your living room, the cube is in your bedroom, the cube is in your child's hand, the cube is in your workplace, the cube is everywhere you look, and you look all day. So in part 5, the story is this. Saturn does not need chains. Saturn builds systems. Saturn builds calendars. Saturn builds economies. Saturn builds social rules. Saturn builds institutions. Saturn builds incentives. Saturn builds scarcity. Saturn builds a world where you feel like you must earn your right to exist. And here is the part that makes people grip the edge of their seat. In this worldview, the system is not satisfied with your time and money alone. It wants your meaning. Because if it can define what your life is for, it owns you completely. So it offers you replacement meaning. Status, recognition, awards, achievements, rank, credentials, a ladder that never ends. If you climb it, you feel a rush, then it fades, then you climb again. This is the hamster wheel in spiritual language, the wheel that turns and turns, the wheel that keeps you running, the wheel that keeps you feeding the machine with your effort, and the machine gives you little treats of validation to keep you going. This is why, in Saturn Cube storytelling, the prison is not only external, it is psychological, it is spiritual. It is the way you start believing you are not worthy unless you are producing, unless you are earning, unless you are improving, unless you are proving. That belief is one of the strongest bars in the cage. And once you believe that, you will police yourself. You will shame yourself. You will punish yourself. You will keep yourself in the box without anyone needing to lock the door. That is the deepest Saturnian trick. Make the prisoner become the guard. Now, if you are listening to this and feeling that familiar pinch in the chest, that mix of recognition and dread, the conspiracy lens says, good. That means you are seeing the pattern. Because the moment you see the pattern, you can start looking for the exit points. This is where the Saturn Cube story turns, the way it often turns in these series. It does not end in hopelessness. It ends in a choice. Because even inside the prison, there are cracks. And the cracks often look like ancient practices that the modern world calls impractical. Rest, Sabbath, silence, nature, prayer, community, generosity, beauty, slow meals, long conversations, unproductive afternoons, walking without a destination, sitting under a tree and doing nothing that earns money. These are rebellious acts in a world that worships productivity. And in this worldview, rebellion is not always loud. It is often gentle, because the system feeds on frenzy. So the first rebellion is calm. The first rebellion is presence. The first rebellion is turning your attention away from the scoreboard and back toward your actual life. And here's the key idea for part 5, the one that ties money and time together into a single mechanism. The system uses money to steal your time, and it uses time pressure to make you chase money. It is a loop. You need money, so you give away your time. Then you have no time, so you buy convenience. Then you spend more money, so you need more money. So you give away more time, round and round, a wheel, a loop, a spell. And Saturn, the Lord of Time, sits at the center of it, not as a planet, but as a principle. The principle that says limitation is normal. The principle that says scarcity is truth. The principle that says fear is wisdom. But what if scarcity is not truth? What if it is a strategy? What if the world is abundant, but the system is designed to make you feel like you are always one step from collapse, so you will not look up? Because looking up is dangerous. Looking up is the beginning of remembering you are more than the cage. Now let us go even deeper, because Part 4 introduced a haunting idea: the reincarnation loop, the memory loop, the reset. Part 5 connects to that by saying, what is a reincarnation loop in everyday life? It is waking up and forgetting who you are every day. It is repeating the same routines until life feels like a blur. It is losing your sacred sense of time, not clock time, soul time, the time that measures meaning, the time that measures connection, the time that measures growth. The system loves to replace soul time with clock time. Clock time is quantifiable. It can be sold, it can be rented, it can be measured. Soul time cannot. Soul time is what you feel when you are fully present, when you hold your child and everything slows down, when you sit with grief and time becomes thick, when you fall in love and time disappears, when you stare at the sky and you remember you are small in a comforting way, not a humiliating way. The cube hates that kind of time, because that kind of time makes you free. So the system keeps you in clock time, keeps you in deadlines, keeps you in hurry, keeps you in lateness, keeps you in scarcity. And then it sells you little packaged forms of escape, weekend vacations, entertainment, alcohol, dopamine, quick fixes. Anything to relieve the pressure without breaking the machine. In this worldview, the machine is clever. It offers you controlled forms of relief, so you do not seek real liberation. Because real liberation would mean stepping out of the game. And stepping out of the game is exactly what the cube cannot allow. So how do you step out of the game? You start by noticing where the game is stealing your soul. You notice which parts of your life feel like boxes. You notice which obligations are real and which are manufactured. You notice how often you're being trained to rush. You notice how often you're being told you are behind. You notice how often your body is carrying stress that is not truly yours but belongs to the system. Then you do something small but powerful. You reclaim an hour. Not to be more productive, not to catch up, not to optimize. You reclaim an hour for presence. You reclaim an hour for nature. You reclaim an hour for prayer without fear. You reclaim an hour for art. You reclaim an hour for silence. You reclaim an hour for your own soul. And if you are someone who feels the spiritual dimension of this theory, you can frame it as warfare. Not warfare with weapons, warfare with attention. Because attention is currency. Attention is life force. The system wants your attention on fear, on scarcity, on comparison, on performance. So you choose to place your attention elsewhere. You place it on what is real, on what is living, on what is loving, on what is sacred. And here is the most provocative way believers in this theory phrase it. They say money is a false god, because money demands sacrifice. It demands your hours, it demands your health, it demands your relationships, it demands your rest, it demands your joy, and it promises salvation, safety, security, freedom. But the salvation never arrives, because the system keeps moving the finish line. So money becomes a god that you keep feeding, and it never says thank you. In that sense, the Saturn Cube Theory treats modern economics like a religion with rituals, work, payday, purchasing, budgeting, debt repayment. A religion with commandments: be productive, be efficient, be competitive, be useful. A religion with priests, experts, managers, institutions. A religion with moral judgments: successful, failed, responsible, irresponsible. A religion with shame, a religion with fear, a religion with endless striving. And the story says, this is Saturn worship in modern clothes. Not because people pray to Saturn, but because they live under Saturnian principles. Time, restriction, measurement, limitation, obedience. So the question becomes, if you wanted to break the spell, what would you do? You would re-sanctify time. You would make time holy again. Not every moment, because you still live in a world with responsibilities. But you would carve out a piece of time that the system cannot buy, a time that belongs to the soul. This is where Sabbath becomes revolutionary. Because Sabbath says you are worthy of rest without earning. Sabbath says your value is not your output. Sabbath says you are not a machine. Sabbath says life is not only labor. And whether you practice Sabbath in a religious way or simply as a human necessity, the Saturn Cube story sees it as the same act. A refusal to be owned, a refusal to be measured constantly, a refusal to let the cube define your worth. Now this part matters, because the Saturn Cube Theory can become a trap itself if it only makes you paranoid. If it only makes you see enemies everywhere, if it only makes you afraid, that would still be feeding the grid with fear. So the healthier version of this story is not panic. It is clarity. It is the moment you realize, even if the cube is only symbolic, it describes something real. It describes the way modern life can feel like a box, and it describes the way freedom begins in the mind and in the heart. Freedom begins when you stop worshiping the scoreboard. Freedom begins when you remember your life is not a transaction. Freedom begins when you rebuild meaning outside the system. So the end of part 5 is not a call to abandon money or ignore time. It is a call to stop letting money and time own your spirit. It is a call to treat money like a tool, not a god. It is a call to treat time like a gift, not a weapon. And it is a call to remember that the most valuable things in life cannot be priced. Love cannot be priced. Presence cannot be priced. Healing cannot be priced. Truth cannot be priced. Courage cannot be priced. Beauty cannot be priced. And if you want to know whether you are still trapped in the cube, ask yourself a simple question. How often do you do something meaningful that produces nothing? How often do you do something loving that earns nothing? How often do you spend time with someone you care about without multitasking? How often do you sit in nature without taking a picture? How often do you pray without asking for something? How often do you rest without guilt? Those are the cracks in the cube. Those are the places where the system cannot reach. Those are the places where you remember you are alive. In the Saturn Cube story, liberation is not one dramatic event. It is a daily practice, a daily refusal, a daily remembering. And the more you remember, the less the cube can feed on you. Because the cube feeds on forgetfulness. It feeds on you forgetting your own worth. It feeds on you forgetting the sacred. It feeds on you forgetting you were never meant to be a unit. You were meant to be a soul. So in part 5, we name the prison the way it shows up in ordinary life. We name the way money becomes a leash. We name the way time becomes a whip. We name the way scarcity becomes a spell. We name the way debt becomes a chain on the future. We name the way the calendar becomes a cage. And then we do the most rebellious thing of all. We breathe. We slow down. We remember. We choose one small act of freedom. Not because we are naive, not because we are denying reality, but because we are refusing to let the system be the only reality. Because if Saturn is the archetype of limitation, then the counterforce is not denial. It is expansion. It is the quiet, stubborn decision to live as if the soul is real, to live as if love matters, to live as if your body is not a machine, to live as if time can be holy, to live as if you can step outside the box, even for a moment, and feel the air of something larger. And once you feel that air, you understand why the system works so hard to keep you busy. Because a person who remembers their spirit is harder to control. A person who remembers their sacredness is harder to scare. A person who remembers love is harder to shrink. So the story ends with a question that lingers, the way these stories always do. What if the cube is not only a symbol out there in the world? What if the cube is the way you have been trained to live? And what if the first door out is simple? Not easy, but simple. Reclaim your time, reclaim your meaning, reclaim your life, even 1 hour at a time. Because the most dangerous thing you can do in a Saturnian world is remember that you are free.